very dark.
All right, we have a little time now where we would like to hear from you and how that was. What you discovered, uncovered, anything that was hard perhaps, questions?
How many of you in the course of that exercise, raise your hand if you gained some new insight into the issue? Great. Okay, way more hands went up than needed to. So, what did your partner, your coach do that helped you gain that insight? We're looking for what it was that actually worked. What helped you sort of get to that deeper level of understanding? Yeah.
My partner gave me some reality testing as to what, during the time when this happened, this incident, what the social mores were at that time.
Great. Okay, that's really useful. So, taking you into the context and the reality of what was going on at the time was a useful thing. So that you could see that maybe this was even outside of the two of you? Am I getting that right?
Right. It was like I was expecting things that perhaps were not expectable at that
Yeah.
time.
Excellent. Very, very good. So the purpose of this, obviously, is so that we can all learn from these experiences and see what works for individual people and then be better mediators ourselves. Did you have your hand?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Could I share what my partner did?
Yes, actually, so we're going to pass this as far as we can pass it.
In your sharing, I just want to ask everybody to be sensitive to anything confidential that's been shared with you.
Yeah.
So don't share that, but share what was done that was helpful. Thanks.
And it's on tape.
Exactly, and our video. But other than that, go ahead.
How my partner helped me was she listened to my story very sincerely and also leads the work properly in order that I could concentrate to my exploring my inner feeling.
Excellent. This is a wonderful point that we sometimes lose sight of. First, some of the power of listening is not just having someone pay attention to the things that you're saying, but listening also is holding an emotional space of support that allows the other person to safely go into their own emotional experience without feeling like they have to be frightened of it, because someone is holding the space of this is a safe thing for you to do. And we miss that sometimes when we think about listening, that's part of the role of a listener. It's very powerful. Very nice. Yes?
When we were talking about what I perceived as the blaming or the conflict, what their perception of circumstances were, she helped me by taking it further to what that person's intentions might have been, to kind of perceive what their intentions might have been for the issue that was being addressed. So that helped me expand my perception of it.
Yeah. Very, very good. This is oftentimes a key element in letting go of anger, is a shift in understanding the other person's intentions. I've found this many times, that if you can really gain some insight into why someone is doing something, that it isn't to hurt you, that they're acting out of their own inner need or out of some other exigency that they feel. That's very powerful. Very good. Did you have something you wanted? This won't go very far, but we'll try it.
There were two things that he helped me see. One is that maybe I needed to forgive him instead of putting all this stuff on myself. And he also gave me permission not to forgive him.
Ah.
And
And why
and
is
help
that?
me look at different aspects or different options about if I did or if I didn't and that kind of stuff.
And why did that feel good to you?
Well, first of all, I was putting all the responsibility on myself
Yeah,
for this, whatever I'm supposed to be doing,
yeah.
forgiving this guy. So that was a good insight because I hadn't looked at it that way at all.
Yeah,
And I'd also wanted to give myself permission of just not doing it at all.
yes.
And that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, this is great. So the permission not to do it at all gives you a choice. And without the choice, it's not a real act. So giving, that's a very useful and powerful thing to do. When you don't feel you have the choice, you automatically begin resisting. And as soon as you have the choice, the resistance starts to disappear because you realize you don't have to do it. You can really choose what you want. And the other part is also very interesting. In every conflict, there are three things, and not just two. There is you, there's the other person, and there's the relationship between you. And in addition to those, of course, we can talk about the process, we can talk about the context. There are other things that arise as well. But the big important thing to see is there is no conflict in the absence of relationship. Conflict, of course, is a kind of relationship by itself. But if you just think that it's your fault or you just think it's the other person's fault, you've missed the fact that it's also the relationship between you, and you can try to fix that as well. Very nice, very good, helpful suggestions. Others? Anything else that worked for you? How about the experience of helping someone go through this? What was that like? Did you enjoy that? Did it feel good to you? Did it feel mediative? Were you mediating?
You know,
Do you care?
I think that it reminded me of when I was first mediating. What are the steps? Oh, okay, 1, 2, 3. So it was that awkwardness of being new at a process.
Yeah. And just as in the beginning when you were mediating, what you learn at a certain point is to throw all the steps away.
Thank you, Ken.
Okay, now this is the big deal. The purpose of the steps is, it's a little bit like the story of Dumbo's feather. Do you know about Dumbo's feather? Dumbo's the elephant with the big ears who can fly, but he can only fly if he's holding a feather. But he drops the feather, and then the cricket, who's his friend, tells him, no, you can fly without the feather. So the 5 steps are your Dumbo's feather, telling you can fly, but the truth is you can do it without. We generated the 5 steps out of the idea of what it is that you have to do in order to let go of this. What is it that actually works? But you could do something else that works just as well and not have it fit within the 5 steps. So you have my permission to throw them away.
Thank you. Or to use them.
Huh?
Or to use them.
Or to use them
Thank you.
whenever and however they come up. So what else, other insights into what it felt like to do this? As a mediator, did this feel like something that you could do in your practice? You're nodding.
Yes, definitely. It's just very logical addition to the healing that's necessary to move beyond.
This is how I feel about it. I feel that it's a natural part of my practice in all the various areas where I work. And I think of it this way. What is it going to take to move them just one step further along the path that they are now on? And maybe that step will be easy and I'll go for another step. And maybe it'll be very difficult and maybe we won't get there. But it's not my job to get them there. It's only my job to invite them in the most skillful way I can. And the choice is theirs, whether to actually take that step. Did any of you encounter resistance? Yes, Howard.
I didn't encounter any resistance here, but I've certainly encountered a lot of resistance when we talked about this with lawyers in the room. I
Yeah.
can just see them wanting to crawl out of the room. The people they're into it, but the lawyers are saying, what in the world am I doing in this room?
Yeah, this is completely, of course, true. We all recognize this.
Well, what do you do with it?
What do you do?
What do you do?
What do I do?
What do you do?
There are several things that I do. The first is I try to speak to the client in a way that doesn't lose the lawyer. This is not an easy thing to do, of course. But at a certain point in time, I will speak directly to the client and say to the client, your lawyer is representing your best interests and trying to put forward what is right for you. And the ultimate decision about what is right belongs to you. And that's my opening. Having said that, what actually happens within the lawyer-client relationship is really the destruction of ongoing relationships with the other person in the lawsuit. Meaning, what happens is that you form an alliance with someone who is going to fight for you, which is predicated on the idea that your interest is in defeating them. And if that's the case, all future communications, all future relationships basically are off, because they get the point. What we fundamentally, I think, have to see is that mediation is being successful now, but we've only been around for about maybe 30 or so years, and law's been around for about 500 to 1,000. And we're actually very rapidly replacing, in my mind, the law as the first avenue of approach. I believe the day will come when the law will be the alternative and mediation will be the norm. And at that point, we will have to then reconfigure our entire process. Here's my sort of, kind of stumbling block about this, which is no lawyer goes to a therapist and says, I want to make a presentation on behalf of my client. It doesn't happen, because they know that the therapist has a specialized body of knowledge and does specialized things in connection with emotion, which the lawyer has nothing to do with. But they don't do that with mediators, and they haven't yet recognized what it is that we're good at and accommodated their practice to achieve the results that they want to achieve by using us in the best way that they possibly can. They haven't figured that out yet. So it's up to us to help them figure it out. Having said that, what we're actually doing is recruiting lots of lawyers who are unhappy. But the reasons for their unhappiness are systemic within the legal system itself. It is a part of the legal project to be adversarial, as we have defined it in the United States especially. In other countries, lawyers are often less adversarial than they are in the US. But here it is exclusively adversarial. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. Yes?
Question. This steps was very interesting, but I wondered what will happen if we facilitate the forgiveness between two people. This is a kind of the process, inner process of one person. But how we can facilitate that?
There are other materials. Did you want to? I've only limited our conversation today to the 5 steps. There are also 10 steps, and there are 15 steps that are in your materials. And there's more in the book Mediating Dangerously, and the other book that I wrote on this topic, which is Crossroads of Conflict. So there are many more forgiveness exercises in those. If you want to do this with the other person, with the two of you together, in a way, you have to shift the questions, because you can't ask them in the same way. If you say in a joint session, what are all the reasons for not forgiving the other person? You will have lost the conversation. The whole thing will blow up. So instead, what you have to do is ask, what do you believe the other person can teach you that would be helpful for you to learn? Or what do you have in common? One of the questions that I really like comes out of narrative mediation that Monk and Winslade have been advocating. And it's just basically, very simply, I use this especially with families. You know, you've had lots of conflict with each other, and yet you're here. Why did you come here? What about your relationship gave you the belief that you might actually be able to fix this? What gives you confidence or hope that this is possible? And then they'll start telling stories that are more positive. Those positive stories, acknowledging stories, are very useful. Sometimes you could just say to someone, you've been telling stories about some of the harm that has been done. Can you say something about something positive about this person? And if you can't, is the problem in them or in you that you can't see it? That's a tough line of questioning, but it's one way of getting into it. But what you want to get is some form of acknowledging story. You treat it very, very differently. So we've kind of made the assumption for this session that you're just doing it individually. Are you ready to see a master at this? Okay, the master is Desmond Tutu. He is probably one of the foremost practitioners of forgiveness in the world today. And I say this not just because of the fact that he's an extraordinary human being, but because of his role in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, and because of his continuing role in developing forgiveness around the world. So I have a friend who's making a film about Desmond Tutu. She's in Los Angeles. She is African American. She is a brilliant filmmaker. And she's traveled to Africa many times to visit with Desmond Tutu and to work with him. And I thought you might like to see this because it's a rather striking example of how deeply forgiveness can work its way into your heart. Ready? And sound.
Needs a microphone.
Do full screen. Yeah. Bottom right hand corner.
This is a moral universe, which means that despite all the evidence that seems to be the contrary, there is no way that evil and injustice and oppression can have the last word. He was the shield that was protected. He would be between the God and the people. As I said, if you wanted to kill us, you had to go through Desmond Tutu first.
I'm certain that assassinating Tutu was discussed at a very high level.
There's something happening here.
Continue in the struggle to make of Africa.
There's a man with a gun over there.
What was our job? Assassinations, gun running, explosions, murders. It was a terrible frustration that we couldn't neutralize Tutu.
I am not going to let you victimize me and hold me in a position where I have an anger against you, a resentment, and I am looking for the opportunity to pay back. You read about what has taken place, you think you understand, and then you go for yourself. You're sort of devastated by the extent of our inhumanity to one another.
At a time when even Nelson Mandela thought There's no way out of this. The one man that stood in this whole process was Desmond Tutu.
Long we pretend until someone does something original.
Even if you are a firm believer as he is, it's still a risk to be rejected by a nation in front of everybody.
If you are the chair of a body such as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you dare not feel as it were.
You can say that the Truth Commission process took the lead via the victims. But the whites are not interested in this process. They say, I have to share a country with people who cannot even hate properly.
They are simply going to say, oh, he's siding with the victims. Oh, he's not showing happiness.
Forgiveness is practical politics. Africa has a gift to give the world, and the world needs desperately.
To bring that African concept, the spirit of Ubuntu, of how we relate to one another as human beings, and to apply it in very practical terms. To me, that's Tutu's legacy.
The world wants to survive, but when you recover that we are finished.
That's the trailer for her film. What do you think?
When will it be
see it.
released? When will it be released?
I'm sorry?
When will it be released?
Well, she isn't she doesn't have the money to finish making it at present, so she's trying to raise that money. But she's hoping next year she will find a time to release it. We actually, I'm going to plan on trying to show this a little bit larger segment of this to the Mediators Beyond Borders Congress in March in Washington, D.C. If you'd like, you're welcome to come and join us there. And I'm hoping that she'll come and speak and say a little something about the work that Desmond Tutu has been doing. We've invited him, but he isn't able to come.
What's her name?
Her name is Karen Hayes. And I think, I don't remember her website, but if you email me, I could get you in touch with it. There is, I've seen about maybe another half hour worth of footage with a lot of scenes of great difficulty and Desmond Tutu really acting in an extraordinary way. But I think you can tell just by looking at him how deep this goes with him, how profound and moving just his own personal beliefs are. So, how are we doing? It's almost time for our panel. Who is here for our panel? I know that two people are. We're waiting for Michael.
No, he's right outside.
Oh, they're just outside?
Yeah.
Well, let's come up and
I'd be
start our
happy to.
panel then, unless there are other comments about the movie that anyone would like to make. I hope you get to watch it because it is really focused on the issue of forgiveness and how he comes to this place and how he struggled with it himself. And now let's set up the chairs.
When you go to South Africa, I've been to South Africa, you really get a feeling from at least I did, from the black people, that they have really, and I didn't ever give it credit to Tutu, I gave it to Mandela.
Yeah.
But you really get a feeling that they're way, way ahead of us in terms of forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, Mandela also has contributed enormously to the avoidance of violence. Just at a personal level for myself, I always believed that it would not be possible to resolve this without warfare. I just thought that it had gone too deep. But they did it. And I think it's, in a way, a combination of those two men and what they brought to bear. And
how they influenced an entire movement. Okay, are we ready? Yeah. You want more light?
It's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce the panelists. So much to say, so little time. I'm going to start with Louise Gibson, I said it correctly, from Baltimore Mediation Center, who has just been an amazing contributor to this whole area of bringing spirituality into practice and transformational mediation. She's a frequent contributor to ACR resolution on a variety of topics, and also an expert and teacher of the Enneagram. It's always wonderful to talk to her and get insights from her about that. And I'm looking forward to hear how she brings forgiveness into her practice. She's also a teacher at
University of Maryland School of Law.
We have Michael Alloy, who I have the great delight of being co-chair of the spirituality section with for 2 years, and he's moved on to bigger and better things and will be installed, I guess, on Saturday as the next president of ACR. So we're just so grateful for you to make time. I know this is going to be a really busy week for you, and he may have to leave a little early, and if so, that's why he's in about 3 meetings right now.
Forgive me if I
Yeah,
need to leave early.
But Michael, I know, also does live and breathe the forgiveness and spirituality in his practice, and is just a great spokesperson and teacher of this. And then we have Nan Burnett, who also integrates this in her practice, and in addition to having led the spirituality section with Michael and others, organizes the Rocky Mountain Retreat, which is just this fabulous opportunity. This is the 5th year where they bring together just wonderful people from the field, inspiration, but also really helping to look at how we care for ourselves, because this work we do causes us to dig deeply, and Nan's been a real leader in that. She's written a book on the subject. What's the name of it?
Calm in the Face of the Storm.
Calm in the Face of the Storm. It's a wonderful book, so if you don't have it, you should get it. And in addition is a board member of Mediators Beyond Borders with Ken, and they'll tell you more about that later. So what we really want to do now is bring everything we've been talking about into focus in the framework of practice. And what does this look like? How do you really take this into practice? Ken's given us a lot of good ideas, hints, suggestions, large and small techniques along the way. And what we're asking these three to share is how do they do it? And do they do it? And if so, do you talk about forgiveness? How do you talk about it? How do you talk about it to the lawyers if you do? And just help us get some perhaps examples and ideas. So,
How much time do you want each of us to have? How much
Would you
time
like
do
to
we
each-
have total?
take,
I think we've got about 30, 40 minutes. Total.
maybe each take about 10 minutes and then we'll get time.
We have an hour.
Hour total, an hour
Okay.
total.
An hour, perfect.
1 hour for everything.
I'm with the group.
Could you use the microphones, please? Thank you. It's hard to hear.
Okay, does that help?
Yeah.
Good, good. Really how happy I am to be here. I am bouncing around, but there's really no place I'd rather be than with you all right now. I always like to take a moment just to be thankful for where I am, and particularly thankful to be between Nan and Louise, my sisters, and with Ken and Eileen. I do think we need to take a moment to be thankful that, you look around the room and you think, how often is it that you get to be with really, truly beautiful people who are doing wonderful work. And, you think about that. How many people are sitting in space like we are right now in this world? Probably not a whole lot. And so I hope that we are thankful. And I think kind of an essential element of forgiveness is really to be thankful for what we have. And part of what I think in entering into any sort of mediation that I have or conflict that I have is, can I enter into that space with forgiveness in my heart? I know you all do this work, and I really do think it changes the whole perspective as to how you walk into the room. If you walk into the room and you view the parties that you're with as really a burden, why are these people in conflict? They're stupid. And then sometimes you may have felt that in a dark moment, but you're thinking then you're going to approach it very differently. If you walk into the room and you say, these people are my brothers and sisters, they're children of God. And so if you think that, you think maybe you relate to them very differently. And then you create a space, I think, where forgiveness can happen. And so if they don't see it in you, and if they don't feel it in you, if you approach them as just a problem to solve, or someone else on their calendar that day, they will know it. It seems to me that people understand your skill. They also understand you have some techniques. But they will look all past that. If you're not with them in that moment, if you don't genuinely care, if you're not open for that opportunity for forgiveness, then I just don't think it will happen. And that becomes very meaningful for them. Now, one of the things I was thinking about is that I really do believe that every sort of conflict that you enter into, or your role as a neutral, a conflict resolver, my work is that as a lawyer. How many lawyers do we have in the room? Okay. And so I do civil litigation mediation. So when I mediate, it's with people who've been in conflict for 3 years, ugly, suing each other, lots of discovery, all those things. But one of the things I really try to do is to be a model for forgiveness in the room. And one of the ways I do it, which is very simple, and it's very simple for me, because sometimes I'll do this in the asking of a question. And I'll say, I really feel like I need to ask a question, but I'm just afraid I'm going to ask it wrong. I'm afraid that when I ask it, you might be insulted or offended by it, and I really hope not. And I don't mean that. And so if I do that, please tell me, please forgive me for doing so, because I don't want to be that way. By the time I enter all that, it's almost impossible for me to ask any kind of question that will be terrible. But the point is, I mean that genuinely, that I don't want to do anything in that process. It's going to be hurtful. And so if I feel like I'm about to say something, because you never know until you say it, it's kind of my preemptive forgiveness. But I ask them, please, will you forgive me if I do that? And people have looked at it very differently. And it's been very fascinating when you enter into it that way. And they may very well say in response to the question, I understand why asking that question might bother you, but I'm glad you did. And don't worry about how I felt about it, because they appreciated that. So I think,
Yeah, Michael, can
yes.
you clarify, what is the question then?
Typically how I start, I don't know what the question will be.
Okay.
But sometimes I know it's going to be a question that if I don't come in too softly, I'm going to get a harsh response. And so if I feel like I'm going to get a harsh response, that's when I kind of bumble along trying to say, okay, how do I say this in a way? And I tell them that. And I say, can you forgive me? Another opportunity for modeling, anyway, happened, and this is a very real situation. I had mediated a case for, this is the second time. It's been going on now for like about 12 hours. And we'd gone through a 9-hour day, and we thought we had it resolved, and then one party wouldn't sign on. So we came back the next day. Now understand that this is a dispute between two neighbors. The one neighbor became so upset with his other neighbor that he literally took out a shotgun, went up to his home, and shot out all the windows. And the other neighbor was just running on the floor, really trying to hide from being shot. As a result of that, this is a person in conflict who had just gotten out of jail for doing that. In addition, part of the resolution of the claim was for this man to give up his home, to sell his home, to give the neighbor money, to settle the dispute. So, needless to say, it was high conflict. And this had been going on for 10 hours, and I walked back into the room, and here I am sitting across from the man who had just gotten out of the jail, who's about to give up his home, and his wife and son are with him. And so I start out saying, well, I just met with the other side, and here's some ideas that they have. And at that moment, this is a big guy, about like 6'5", 300 pounds. He stood up and he just pounded the table. And he said, you know what, I just want you to quit talking. He said, why don't you just do something about this? He said, I'm angry with you and I'm just going to leave. You know, well, at that moment, you know, I thought, well, and this is where mindfulness came in. I said, well, I really just needed to be quiet. And I took a deep breath, and at that moment I looked at him, and it was genuine. Both Ken and Nan and all of you talk about listening to what's going on in your body at the moment. And at that time I felt extremely bad. I felt bad, I felt inadequate. I felt I just really let him down. And so I looked at him and I said, you know what, I'm just so sorry. Obviously I'm not being very helpful. And I have to tell you, that hurts me, and I'm sorry. I only do this really for one reason, because I don't like people suffering conflict, and I don't like for them to be alone. And I try to do what I can to be helpful. And obviously I'm not doing very well at it right now. I said, but I promise you, if you stick with me, then I'm going to try harder, and hopefully I can be of some help. So would you forgive me for not being very helpful at this moment? Well, he wasn't a very sophisticated man, and nothing happened at that time, but we continued to talk. The next time I met with him, he looked at me and he said, you know what, I just want to apologize to you. I'm sorry for how I acted. And this is just a difficult time for me, and I appreciate everything you do. Now, at least in my opinion, that was modeling forgiveness. And I think sometimes as mediators or whatever we do, we go into a situation and we think we have the answers, right? Spent a lot of time at conferences knowing the answers. You know what, we don't. And people understand that. And so I think it takes a bit of humility. It also takes just some openness to say, you know, I'm sorry. I have never had it not work. And I have to tell you, probably the reason it hasn't is because it's always been genuine. And if it's not genuine, it won't work. And I've had it happen on a number of occasions. One other little story that'll help you understand that is that I had in the course of a mediation, a woman had just lost 2 children as a result of a car accident. And these were 2 teenage children who were actually the same age as my sons at the time this happened. So I'm sitting in the room with her, and even as I think about that now, I just felt very empty and very inadequate. And I just looked at her and I told her, I said, you know what? I don't know how you get up in the morning. I don't know how you do what you do. And I feel real inadequate right now, and I really just want to leave. I don't know if I can do anything for you today. And I did. It just hit me too hard. And she looked at me and then she said, you know, you don't need to worry about me. I'm doing okay now, and I have my faith that has helped to get me through this. And it was really just a beautiful, powerful moment. Because at that moment, in essence, what I was doing, I say, forgive me. Because here I am, you know, you spend your time, you spend your money to be in this space, and I'm just bumbling really bad. And it was interesting, in that moment she helped me. And so I think that, you know, to receive forgiveness, to be forgiven is one thing, but you know, there's 2 components to it. The other part is to say, I'm sorry. And I think that you can create that moment if you're able to say, I'm sorry. And I tell you, it's a courageous thing to offer forgiveness, but I think sometimes we forget how difficult it is to say you're sorry. And so I would tell you then one more story about that, and then I'll go on with Nan and Louise. They will offer you something that you can take. I will offer you stories. But the other thing is, and they're very happy with those roles, by the way. They're very happy. They had the other one is, and I have to tell you this, is that they've kind of heard these stories, or one anyway. But
I just have to pause for a moment. when you've been working with Michael or doing workshops for years with Michael, you get emails from him every couple of weeks that have a story in them about something that he just happened to remember when he was a little boy about Aunt Emily or Grandma Sue or something that will relate to one of my children. And so he is a master storyteller, and they're always around these topics of peace and forgiveness and so forth. So I know there's another good one coming.
Well, you know, and this is interesting how we learn these things. And this one kind of follows the story of my father. And really the most recent lesson I learned from that. To give you the background, my father left when I was 8 years old. Did not return until I was 20. So I had no contact with him for those 12 years. The interesting story is that I was a freshman in college, and I thought, you know, I don't know my dad, and I'd like to know him. So I just sent a letter. And a day or two later, I got a note in my college campus box that said, call your dad. And it had a phone number on it. So I did, and I met him. And anyway, that spring he came back home. And he came home, and he and my mother connected immediately. She never remarried. He had left with some other woman. But he came back, immediately came into the home, and it was like he was never gone. And so they were together for the next 20 years. Now, I always looked at this from my mother's perspective. And always did, and I thought, my God, how much I loved her. And I thought, what a model in your lives of forgiveness. This is a man who left her with 5 children, with another woman for 12 years, and then came back, and she did not miss a beat. And I looked at that, and I thought, you know, she never said anything but kind things about him. And I thought for her, and so I really never started to think, my God, what an act of forgiveness to do that. And so I always kind of viewed it from my mother's perspective. And it really wasn't until recently that I thought, you know what? What about from my dad's perspective? I thought, what a courageous thing to do, to come back home after 10 years. He didn't know whether he'd be accepted. You know, he didn't know what would happen to him. He didn't know how well people would respond to that. And I thought, my goodness, for him to come back and in his way to say, I'm sorry, and then for my mother to say, I forgive you, is a beautiful thing. But I thought, what an act of courage to say, I'm sorry. And so I think when we talk about forgiveness, there really are 2 components to it. And the last component didn't hit me, you know, because I have to say this in my heart. I love my dad in a way. It wasn't in the stature of my mother, and never will be. But at that moment, I thought, you know, I should be proud of it. It was a courageous thing to do, to say, I'm sorry. And so sorry is really the beginning of that process. And so I think whenever we do the work that we do, there can be plenty of opportunities to kind of insert that into the process. And I think when we do it, it's just such a beautiful thing. And you can really do something that makes a difference. You know, it's so interesting. And everyone that I do, everyone always says, take away all the substance. I don't think they hurt because of what they've done to me. And they need to hear that. People accept that we make mistakes. I have to tell you the last bit of the story, which is, I don't know if it's about forgiveness or not, but it completes the story. And y'all are very kind to listen to this early. Thank you, and forgive me. And we were talking about this because they always help me through this, and I thought, you know, I had never told my father that I forget. I just had never done so, and I'd been carrying this with me. There was never animosity. It was always very kind. Always would hug and kiss my father and tell him I love him. But I'd never taken that step. And so I'm struggling with this because I talk to people like you about this, and I'm saying, Michael, you're not living it in this most important moment. And I thought, how do I do this? My father's older now and not sophisticated, and how do I do this? How do I have this discussion? Because I really didn't want him to feel bad either. why do I want to do that? And so here was my response to this and how I sort of shared my forgiveness. I just looked at him and said, Dad, I just want you to know how happy I am that you came home. Now, and the reason I say that is that there are many ways to talk about forgiveness and to ask for it and to share that. And so for me anyway, that was my way to say in kind of a different way that I forgive you, which is I'm happy that you're here. And so I guess what I would want you to think about is that there are many ways to do it. It may not be forgiveness. It may not be using the word forgiveness. It may not be using the word I'm sorry. And if you can think about it in different ways, I think it can really affect the work that you do. Y'all have been here half a day, probably the most brilliant people I know, and the kindest people and the most beautiful souls. And so I'm sure you understand how powerful of an element it is. Someone was talking about Desmond Tutu's book, No Future Without Forgiveness. I really don't think there is ever any resolution without forgiveness. My bet is right now, if you look deeply, y'all are carrying that with you to a certain extent, unresolved issues. And it's probably because you haven't forgiven. And it maybe is because you haven't said, I'm sorry. And so there are two sides to that. And it's just like anything, it's hard, but it's just liberating. And you will fly when that happens. That's probably all I have to say for now. My book ends.
Only the perfect thing.
Thank you, Michael. And Michael, do you need to leave now, or are you okay?
A few minutes.
Okay.
I'll try not to. I really just want to be here. So anyway, but there will come a time when the front of the room will be empty, so I better get there. And but I have some time to say. Please, I want to invite you.
Well, I'll just segue,
Sure.
how blessed we are even to have chosen to have spent this time with Ken and Eileen, and then this afternoon. I think that when Nan and Michael and I were just talking about the panel, which really we talked more about this summer than we did in the last month. But we knew we were actually going to be with others who self-select, who could be up here too, right? Just sharing your own stories. You know this like we know this, and it's always fresh, it's always beautiful, it's always pure. And I thought I might just begin with in the exercise that Ken had and Eileen had asked us to do just an hour or so ago. My partner and I, Jody, we made it down to the other end of the conference, and in one of the large ballrooms, we were looking for chairs, and I peeked through the door, and it was my beloved commercial section. I'm a commercial mediator, but also a family mediator, and predominantly really in the family arena. And all the commercial work that I do, I still see it through a family systems lens. But the room's packed, and they were in there talking about impasse. And I could just hear a little bit, basically about sort of the way that a mediator can very cleverly manipulate people to give up or do what the mediator wants them to do. And I came back to Judd, and I just sort of felt this sigh, like, oh gosh, I'm so happy that I'm in the place where I am here at ACR. And at the same time, without wanting to be disparaging in any way, there's so much work for us to do in our own lives, as Michael, reminds us of, but also within our own section and world here at ACR, for the potential and the possibility that can really come about when two or more people are brought together, whether it's a medical malpractice, or whether it's a divorce, or whether it's between the two neighbors, or whether it's in a church congregation. The incredible opportunity there is for a deepening dialogue about things that are really important. And the idea of mediating dangerously, I think forgiveness is at the heart of that. And so right before the panel, when we were coming in the door, and I was going to say, forgive us for coming in a little late, we were and how quickly we use forgive me, isn't it? Oh, forgive me, I was a little late. And how powerful real forgiveness is. We were asked, and you will be on your way out, there's a camera out there, and someone will say, would you like to be on film to talk about the leadership of ACR? So there's Michael saying, go say something. So of course I would, on behalf of my friend Michael Alloy. But one of the pieces that just came to me immediately was what I hope will be the next year of ACR leadership under Michael. And I think we've had marvelous leadership. I think we've been incredibly blessed with the right kind of leaders at the right time. I think the time is really emerging right now to mediate from the heart, and for all of us to really mediate from the heart, and to mediate as we tell our stories or see our opportunities with a little, what I call as a teacher, the little M mediating, not just, and I might share with you some practices as a mediator, big M, and I'm under my professional code of responsibility and ethics and so forth, but the little M opportunities that we have that are all around us, to be able to see the humanity in people and how it is that we might mediate, as has been beautifully called, without a net. We were laughing at lunch, mediation soleil, like Cirque du Soleil, we know we are experts at what we do. But to get out there, at times, even that just sort of immediately kind of erupts. It wasn't planned, it wasn't scheduled, we weren't called in to mediate, but between friends or colleagues or even strangers, and how it is that we can have an impact on that in a way where there can be real understanding. When I teach about mediation, I try, when we have a lot of time, to always end. And then in my mediations, I always end with something as well. But on this whole cycle of forgiveness, and the first time I had been introduced to the cycle of forgiveness, I was in law school, and it was from a Mennonite. Some of you might know of Ron Crable, and he's with. He does work for CRS, and he's had pieces out here and there. But Ron gave me this concept that we live in relationship that's open. Most of us are in open relationships, and what we define by open is that we don't have contracts. Even our marriages, there's a covenant, one might say, I would say, or there is a contract civilly. It's not prescribed. Unless you have like a prenup agreement, and you might. But generally speaking, our roles and the way we're going to get along, all those things, are just not all written down. And most of our work relationships, even if we have a contract between us, or even it might even have a non-compete or whatever that is, nonetheless, all the different things that we do and the way we interact with each other, they're very undescribed. They're not written down. So we have this idea of being an open relationship with our neighbors, with our children, and the list is long. And something happens in our relationships, even the ones that are the closest and most dear to us, our friendships, our spouses, our partners, where there's an injury. And I've since expanded on Ron's original thinking about this, but I've been so grateful to him, because what he had given me years ago was, we have open relationship, there's injury, and then there is this potential for forgiveness if we are to enter back into relationship again. I've expanded on that in this way, that yes, we're an open relationship, yes, we experience injury, whether it is a hurtful comment, or whether it's a real breach of that relationship, or whether it's something else. And I think with all the work that we're all of us, many of us are interested in from a neuroscience perspective and others, that a couple things happen to us physiologically, and you'll watch the body. We retreat. And at that time when we retreat, or when our clients retreat, there are a lot of messages that are given. And one of the messages is actually potentially from us as the mediator. So to put that in perspective, when you're in a relationship, something happens, the good friend says, the colleague whom you go to says, the spiritual advisor says, someone says, you've been done wrong, or stay away from them, or I wouldn't talk to her anymore, or he's not good for you any longer, or get over it, or just go take a sleepy pill and wake up in the morning, you'll be okay, or maybe you need a good meal, you want to take a vacation, or there are lots of messages that come when we have been hurt and harmed. And my belief is that that's usually about that time, whether it's been a week or a month or 2 years, that we as mediators have the opportunity to be one of those messengers carrying some message. And I believe on the word of forgiveness, one of the messages could be, how is it that this is affecting you? And just looking at the 5 steps, what's it taking from you? What is it that you're really yearning for? And I'm going to now braid in conflict transformation. There's a worldview as mediators that we take on if you choose to mediate from a relational perspective. And it's the belief that what people want most of all is to be understood and to be reconnected, even with their enemy. Even if that doesn't mean agreement, or living together again, or doing business together again, or getting paid fully for the breach of the contract or for the injury. It's a reconnection with the person who has harmed him, you, her. And in that belief system, there's another one that people have the capacity to be able to offer and to receive that kind of connection. And so if we go back to this idea of like even a cycle of reconciliation or a cycle of forgiveness, we can be that messenger as a mediator, I think, to simply offer the possibility. And as a transformative mediator, to always hold the hope, but I always will add, or not, because it is so precious. It has its own time, and it is never to be forced. But we don't know when the right time is for those with whom we work. But to know that we're helping to foster a potential opportunity for them. Because if we continue with that cycle, if you will, of forgiveness, that after the messages come in, there's oftentimes a time of reflection, if we're lucky. And I think as mediators, we can help to bring that possibility to fruition. Some people already come to mediation having been quite introspective for a long time about what the issue is, especially perhaps those of you who are in the divorce arena, as am I. Sometimes it's for the first time that opportunity happens through mediation. But mediation or not, the influence that we have as mediators, capital M and little m, can be to help foster in ourselves too this introspection. It's usually at that time that we realize where we've been hurt similarly before in our lives, or what it was really about underneath. And this is where I think mediating dangerously can also come in. Because for many of us, we've really been trained for so many years, or maybe our first training, there was an impression left upon us that the mediation was all future focused. That the past was to be put aside, just look at the now and look at the future. And a transformative relational way of looking at conflict would be to say that the past can be incredibly important. But why? Because you have a choice in what you want to hang on to or what you want to release. And you also have a choice for asking of yourself how you make sense of that past to be able to inform the decisions that you make today and into the future. And so forgiveness, I think, is a huge, huge piece. As Michael said, if there's really to be resolution, and that's what we're about, it oftentimes will take that. And if we are so blessed, we might be part of that process. And we might not see the forgiveness unfold in the moment of the mediation. We might not see it in the 3 or 5 sessions that we have with that family doing their business succession planning while they're wrangling with, partnership issues and so forth. But we know the difference when there are these shifts in the way that people even speak to each other. And when Michael said in one of his latter stories that forgiveness has so many different kinds of language with it, that was one of the pieces that had really come to my mind as well. That I have become so hopefully keen to listen for the different ways that people do offer forgiveness and ask for forgiveness. It's in the offering that we know there's real strength. And I, just by way of example, I can give a moment on that, but I want to finish up on when there's this introspection. So you've got open relationship, you've got injury, you've got the various messages, and then people will make choices. I'm not ever, I've been done wrong, and never talk to that kind of person, or I hate all doctors, or I hate all men, or all women are nasty, or all the kinds of stereotypes that come out of our injuries. When there's this opportunity for some introspection in a safe place that I think can happen in mediation, and I'm not confusing this with therapy, but I am very clear about the kind of clarity that can emerge from deep understanding, and conflict is a catalyst for that. From that often comes a head commitment about what someone will do, decision making. And that's what mediation is all about, right? Dialoguing and making decisions, informed decisions. Typically, the heart is oftentimes not connected up with a lot of those head decisions, but it can be, or it can be shortly to follow. And it's when you have both, when a decision's been made that the heart is very much a part of, I think that's when we really see true conflict transformation. And that as mediators, we have that chance to do that. And so the how, the language, I think we need to be listening for all the time, and it can be things like, I want to, if I think of divorce practices, mine, where oftentimes probably 40% involves an affair at some point along the way, the kind that's emotional. People seem to be able to get over the ones that are just physical, don't last terribly long. But if there's an emotional connection, and sometimes there's even a remarriage from that. But the kind of language that will be, no, I want you and the children to have the house. There's not going to be a buyout. Or I want you to have all my stock options. Of course, those of us who are lawyers in the room, or have others who are friends, they're looking at these agreements that we write, like, no, you're not going to do that. You got much better in court, or you would be protected. I can protect you. As a profession, lawyers or therapists or anybody else, we can really trash quickly what was so precious and really leads to peace in a family and peace internationally. So the language can be sometimes what one gives by way of property. The language can be from, for instance, I think of my insurance practice, where I can have an adjuster say something like, I'm only authorized to pay $20,000, but if I could, I would have my company pay you more. They would not allow me to do that, but if I could, I would want to. And then you hear things like, because I know, I've witnessed this a number of times, because I've had an insurance adjusters say things like, because my sister was in an accident like this, or because my cousin lost her child in a malpractice matter like this, because I was in an accident and had all this stuff with my back and it was just soft tissue and no one really believed me either, and I just had good days and bad days. I believe you. I believe you. It's the language of offering and then also of the ability to receive. When mothers or fathers will say things like, with their bar mitzvah coming up or the PTA meeting, no, I want you there in a bitter divorce. That's the language of forgiveness. It comes in such precious kinds of ways. And so I would simply offer for you all to think about, and you already are, I know, to listen really carefully and then to pause and just allow a moment of grace for those kinds of words to have their place in the room. And maybe, as I do in my practice, reflect it back, again, with the space. And the last thing is, think about that I do all the time, my mediations, offering people at the close of your mediations to say anything they'd like to the other person. And I do pepper it with some language from appreciative inquiry. There might be where I say this to the lawyers whom I work with all the time. I definitely say it to the parties when when their counselor are not present as well. You know, I'm just wondering, after all this work, the 5 sessions or the meeting, you know, everybody's been at this for 8 hours today, or it could be circuit court, you know, everybody's been working pretty hard for 2 hours, workers' comp matters. Is there anything that you all would like to say to each other as you close? There might be, there might not be, never forced. There might be a word of appreciation or not. Is there anything? Pause. The most astounding things will be said. Even if people didn't get what they wanted, or they thought they could have gotten more in court, or they thought they gave up more than they should have. It's a way, I think, for forgiveness to begin to either have seed, or to grow, or to actually be given. And so with that, I will close, pass it on to my friend Nan, and I'll share with you a couple books I do love. I don't know if you know the work of David Augsburger, but David has Caring Enough to Forgive, which we all say, yeah, that's a great one. But you flip it over, and it says Caring Enough to Not Forgive. And this is what I think is also really helpful for us as mediators, because this is something that can never be forced and has its own time, but we have an amazing opportunity to help foster it. Thank you. I feel it's.
Thank you, Michael.
Only in this section they kiss each other goodbye.
Commercial people like the mutual.
No kissing in the commercial.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Wow. Thank you, Louise. I'm not allowed to, you can't call her, it's Louise. I can call her Louise. No one else can. I've never said so otherwise, but what Dan does reminds me of my husband, it's all good.
Wow. What an incredible day. Forgiveness. And I really want to thank Eileen, because Eileen has carried this torch for this topic in our section for a long time. And you can never explore the topic enough, and yet it seems so basic. But like an onion, you peel the layers of the onion of forgiveness back, and you can really get to some important things in your life. And in my dyad, I was thinking about this as I was sitting here with my siblings of choice, that my issue was with the siblings that God gave to me. Imagine that. And choosing in my later life to go, you know, I just kept tired of building these bridges that no one ever crosses, and so I'm just going to stop and do other things. And then finding out in my dyad that I really missed that real family, and that I have work to do, that I have to go back there, and another layer of the onion came off as far as me building bridges with my 3 Southern white male bigot brothers. Somewhere in my DNA, I loved dearly. Okay, now I am known in this group as the saint of irreverence, okay? So I can't be the peace the way that these people can be the peace, but I can certainly talk about it. So I was thinking about my family of choice, yes. I was thinking about my family of choice in relation to that dyad, and how, and I know that all of you have this in your life somewhere, and we find a lot of this in this section, where you walk into a room and you feel like you have members of your family that are here that you don't know yet, but you've known forever. And that was really true when Michael grabbed me by the ear his last year with Eileen, looking for someone to replace her as she rotated out of the spirituality section. And I just felt like he was my long lost brother. And as we talked in the following months running the section, he kept saying, how is it that you don't know Louise Vincent? How can that be? You guys are 2 of the same pod. You have to meet her. And we had been each other about 10 minutes. And so back to forgiveness.
Thank you for that.
Yes. And he is so genuine. He really, really is so genuine. And count on Michael to give us the perfect story. And we all here at the section are just hoping that he carries this message to the leadership of ACR in this year that's coming up. We have big plans for Michael Alloy and ACR because of the spirituality section. And Jody and Joanne, our spirituality section leaders, were given the task of hosting our big fiesta or whatever they're calling it this year, and they gave that to spirituality section, and those two people worked diligently to do that, so we hope you all join us then. Forgiveness. This is our moment. This is our time. Barack Obama. And I thought about that when Michael and Louise were talking about the fact that this might be the time in the development of our profession that we're ready to have mediation from the heart. When I'm teaching mediation and I talk about apology and forgiveness, I always teach my students about the Delta Airlines crash in Dallas. There were 77 people that were killed, and it was wind shear. And for many months, in fact, maybe a couple of years, they weren't sure whether it was pilot error or not. And so they assigned a company representative to every single family that was killed in that crash. They started with, "We're so sorry for your loss. What can we do to help you? Here's a phone, here's a credit card. Can we pay for your medical? Do your children need therapy? What do you need from us?" And they were assigned to Delta Airlines during that entire period, and no lawsuits resulted from that crash. And this was a long time ago. I want to say it was the end of the 70s or the early 80s when this crash happened. And I really think about that when I think about proactive opportunity to move into the conflict with people. Now, my people are typically the Jerry Springer crowd. You know, I hate you, bitch, at the basketball game, you know, in front of like 150. And so by the time I get them, they have their stories down, and they know their scripts, and they can just do the two-step with each other like there's no tomorrow. And so my opportunity for forgiveness is huge when I get to these people, because they've been in this conflict for such a long, long time. And so one couple I always think about when I think about forgiveness was, and she was borderline. I did not need the MMPI to know that. The hair on the back of my neck stood up the first time I met her. And this guy had been in the fan blade relationship with her, where every time he spoke to her, he was walking into the blades of a fan, you know, and he would just leap hobbling from the room. He couldn't be right if he went to the left, the right, or stayed in the middle. 7 years post-decree, they had 11 actions in front of the court, and they spent $150,000 at least on just post-decree matters. And so Ken was talking about ritual earlier, and I'm an experiential psychotherapist from background before. My pre-mediation was experiential psychotherapy, where it's all about going down into the gullet, grabbing the emotion, bringing it up, and holding a mirror in front of people so they can see it. So I asked her to get up. This was in the middle of like the 5th heated exchange of the same spiral that they just couldn't get off. And I stopped and I got up and I asked her to join me in the middle of the room, and I positioned her, and then I got him out of his chair and I said, "Dance with him. I'm not going to touch him. Dance with him. Put your hand here." And she puts her claws on his shoulder, puts her steel grip. And I said, "You love this. You love to hate him. Don't you want to make a different choice?" To which she immediately just sobbed and broke down, because even as a borderline, there's always the opportunity that people can do something different. And she saw in that moment that she couldn't keep it up anymore, that it was really killing her. And he was a dead man walking. And they had a 15-year-old son who, you can imagine, had every neuroses known to man and was in constant counseling over this triangle of horror that the parents had set up for them. And so I said, "Would you rather take his hand and release him?" And I made them go through a divorce ritual, even though they'd been divorced for 7 years. I release you, and we will stop. We will stop this. So it didn't sound like "I forgive you," and I didn't think that there was any way that I could get her to go to "I forgive you" in that very emotional time, but she did forgive herself enough to stop the dance, or at least to see it so that she could stop it. And they have not been back to court, and their son is now 22 years old. And in that one moment, you can bring peace to a child's life. Then you realize the power power that we have as mediators, the amazingly powerful opportunity that we have to, as Louise says, listen for the opportunity to come up and know where it is and know when to go forward with it. So in my mediations, I don't look as reverent as Michael does. I get up and really sort of get in their faces. I'm a family systems background person, so I believe that if I've got a chaotic family system, that's where I have to join them, or I can't mess with their system. So it looks a little bit different. But there's something that I always have practitioners say to me: I don't know if I should be doing this mediation. Am I really the right one that needs to be doing this mediation? So I brought something that I'd like to read to you that I often give to my graduate students. The principles of clarity. In this moment, I trust my instincts. I acknowledge the truth of my involvement in this case. I'm open to the present. I am committed to what I say and do what I say I'm going to do. I treat myself with kindness and respect. I acknowledge my interdependence with the people in this case. I embrace my life with passion, and in this moment, I am the best practitioner possible. If they are sitting at your table, a power higher than you put them there. And you have to go with your instincts and trust that you're the right person that can have the best ear for them. You're the right person that can lead them out of the wet paper bag that they put themselves into. I just want to share this one little handout. We'll just drag all the way over, and maybe I can use them. Did you turn your one on? I'm loud. I'm a big loud. Okay, so these are the 6 paradoxes of forgiveness, all right? So the people always have the choice of either acknowledging the truth, or they can stay in denial and delusion. And denial is a wonderful thing. And we know this in our own lives, and also in the lives, do you think it'll reach?
Just here.
Okay. And also, except I'm left-handed, that's okay. I'll run it. Also in the lives of the participants. They have a choice always between feeling the feelings that are present at the table. How many of us are comfortable with the feelings that come up at the table? Sometimes we're not at all. And that really makes a difference with the people. And the opposite of that would be to repress them. And when we repress feelings, the memory of them haunts us and they come back again and trigger us. Releasing the energy used to contain or deny the emotion, or you can choose to rigidly hold on to it. And we have seen all of those people. And a case that I recently had, I was absolutely certain that I was going to be able to settle this case. All the opportunities for empowerment were there. I had all the other parties who were bringing the case ready to settle it. And this gentleman absolutely could not release it. It was his story, it was his life, and it was probably the reason why he was still living. That speaks to negative intimacy. You can let go of the fantasy, whatever that is for them, or you can be re-victimized. How many are familiar with the work of Byron Katie? She wrote a book called Loving What Is, Black Belt in Codependency Training, I'm telling you. And so I did a 3-day training with her for therapists in Seattle many years ago, and there were about 200 therapists in the room, but we were all there doing our own work. And this is how clear she is about the work that she teaches. About the third row back, there was a girl maybe in her mid-30s that got up and was immediately emotional. And she talked about the fact that when she was 6 years old, her stepfather had molested her. And she got up out of her chair, Byron Katie did, and she walked to the edge of the thing and she said, "Sweetheart, exactly what did he do to you?" And in very graphic detail, she said, "I had to put my penis on his mouth, my mouth on his penis." And you can hear a pin drop in this room. Everybody's just can't believe she's going there. And she said, and how many times, sweetheart, did he do that to you? And she said, once. And she said, and how many hundreds of times have you re-abused yourself with that memory? And are you ready to give it up now? I mean, how stark that reality that, okay, this happened one time. You have the choice, you can release it. Or you can be re-victimized every time you go there. The fifth one is grieving the loss. Do we grieve the loss of that relationship or the person, or do we stay controlled by it? And the last one is, do we integrate the experience that the path of forgiveness brings to us, or do we stay with our woundedness? And so if you have these, you can oftentimes ask your questions in the form of, do you want to stay wounded, or are you ready for a different choice? Choice theory is all about empowerment of the client, and forgiveness is a huge piece of this. You have the choice to forgive them and let yourself go, because clearly they're not being hurt by your feelings. So, should I talk about MBB now? Or you want to finish your little?
What did you mention? No?
Okay, good,
Okay.
because we're going on this. Okay, good.
Unless it's such quick enough. No, I'm just gonna be.
Yeah,
Are there questions for?
actually, I always think whenever we have a panel, I look around the audience and think almost everybody in the audience could easily be on this panel. So let's now expand the panel to include all of you. Do any of you have experiences with forgiveness that you would like to share in terms of techniques that have worked for you? Things that you do in your practice? Howard?
People don't think that you use forgiveness in commercial stuff too much, and I have to tell you that I had a case that was such a commercial case, it was all commercial, and the guy just said, if you can get him to tell me the truth, I'll settle this case. And the guy walked in the room, I said, will you just come in and tell the truth on this thing? You're broke, and he needs to know that, and he needs to know that you screwed up, and you don't have any money. And the guy walked in the room and he said, I'm here to tell you, I'm absolutely destitute, I'm broke, I made a horrible mistake on this case, and I'm really sorry. The guy stood up, shook his hand, and said, thank you very much, this case is done.
Yeah.
It was a commercial case.
Yeah, among commercial mediators, it's commonly felt that what happens doesn't have emotion. But how much emotion do we attach to money? Probably more than almost any other thing that you can think of. So money is a metaphor for respect, love, relationship, caring. It's a whole series of different things that it represents. And in a way, commercial cases, in my experience, often have repressed emotion, which is what Nan is talking about here, where people have made a choice to be tough with each other for business purposes, or to be tough for themselves for business purposes. But underneath it is an intense set of emotions that are driving the dispute, but nobody's discussing them. So that's a great example of a case where somebody just told the truth and that was all the other person wanted to hear. Yeah.
In cases that I've done, I do restorative justice, and where I've brought victims of the people being killed with the person that killed their family member. Often it is the family member who's trying to convince the offender that they're forgiven. And I think the hardest thing for people is self-forgiveness. We haven't talked very much about that today, but I think that's probably one of the hardest things to do. I think we do it to ourselves, and I think people who do serious crimes do it too.
Yeah, it's also, I don't think forgiveness is complete until you do that step of self-forgiveness. It's often easier, as hard as it is to forgive the other person, it is usually what you're left with, just as the example with Byron Katie, her stepfather did that one time to her, she repeated it 100 times, so her suffering was really more the result of her. So however it shows up, it's the self-forgiveness that is usually the deepest peace.
in some cases it has to happen first. It just depends.
Can I add something to that, just with
Please,
both
yes.
of those? Howard's story, and then also the one with, if you all don't know Linda Harvey's work, it's also wonderful. I hope you get a chance to talk to others about it while you're here. But just by way of example, in terms of the how-tos, Monday I had a matter where there had been a lot of physical damage as a result of, it's in a commercial matter, and the guy said to me, in a caucus, I'd pay him $25,000 to $25,000 to restore basically what it was that was damaged. He said, even though only to get myself out of this because I hate him that much and he is so wrong, etc. And in doing some work with him, he said, "Oh, I'd pay him $35,000 if he would admit his role in this and how this whole thing got started." So we took that back in to the joint session, which I always do, asking them if they want to be able to speak for themselves about what happened in caucus, which I would really encourage you all as a tool, not do the work for them, because forgiveness has to come from the heart, from the people themselves. But to get to what Linda was saying, he said that to this other gentleman, and the guy said, basically, you gotta be kidding me, that's why we're here, you're a jerk, you started the whole bit. And so just reflecting that, I put in the hypothetical to the guy who was paying. What would it sound like if for you actually to pay $35,000 to know that there had been an acknowledgement? Because I'm not sure the other fellow really, I know it comes in different languages, what it could be. And he said, well, if he would just simply say, yeah, I'm the one who said that blankety blank blank about your other partner. That had nothing to do with what this damage piece was all about. Huge. And the other fellow was able to say that. At the end, $35,000 was paid. At the end of it, when I asked them if there's anything they wanted to say, the first guy paying for the first time in 3 hours, in the last 2 minutes, said, okay, I'm glad this is over with, I know I'm gonna, I'll send you the check, et cetera, and so forth. And look, I shouldn't have done what I did either. That's the self-forgiveness piece. And it's just amazing how it's so reciprocal and relational, that self and other, and they need each other.
Self-forgiveness is the last piece of forgiveness, and the one that is usually left out, and is the most difficult of all. And it's present in every conflict, no matter what. Even if it's clear that the other person did this to you in a horrible way, the people in restorative justice cases who were classified as the victims, there's some part of them that says, I should have done something differently. It was my responsibility to have avoided this. Maybe if I'd only done this, it would have been different. And that's the deepest level. If you can get that, but the first thing in my experience is to get that dialogue out into the open. Meaning the part that's saying, if only I had said this. So I typically ask a question like, what do you wish that you had done instead of what you did at the time? What are you beating yourself up for? Sometimes there's another question, which is, and I've used this to begin a mediation process, but it's typically a family mediation and I have some knowledge of what's been going on. And the opening question is there anyone here who would like to apologize for anything about what has happened in your family? And there's deadly silence. And then somebody steps forward. And I usually know who that person is going to be in advance. Another piece, and I think Michael really spoke to this in his comments, if you begin with some degree of humility on your part, it makes it a little bit easier for them to do that. And he talked about modeling behavior, and sometimes just a very, very simple statement like, well, I really didn't do that very well, did I? That clearly bombed. Are we actually succeeding in reaching an agreement here? Because it doesn't feel like it to me yet. So maybe I need to do something different. Do you have any suggestions for what I can do? And that stops them completely. They have no idea what to say. But because I'm the one who's supposed to know what's going on here. But it also gives them permission to be able to be self-reflective and find yourself sort of not as perfect as you would like to yourself to have been, and for that to be okay. There's a wonderful book on this by Tara Brach that we were just talking about called Radical Acceptance. We were talking about it, and it's about accepting yourself and learning to extend compassion and generosity and empathy to yourself. The techniques for doing this are somewhat similar to the ones that we've described before, but the people who need it the most are the ones who put it off the most and find it easier to forgive the other person. And with those people, typically they are self-deprecating, and what you want to do is reverse it and ask them to reach self-forgiveness first, and only after they have done that should they go to the other person. You can oftentimes tell who this person is in advance because they will be very self-deprecating throughout the conflict. But that's really where the action is, and if they can get to a place of self-forgiveness, then the other person is relatively easy. Thank you for raising that.
A few times throughout the day, it's come up, this whole issue of dealing with the emotions and creating the safe container. Nan talked about how important it is to be comfortable with the feelings. So I just wanted to mention that John Ford and I will be doing a session on that very topic on Friday called Developing Emotional Intuition.
And since we're into shameless self-promotion, it's time for a word about, just to let you, we're going to close in a few minutes, but I'd like to let you know that tonight, I did not mention, I'm the president of Mediators Beyond Borders. Nan is on the board. Many people in this room are members. How many of you are members of MBB? Okay, great. We're having a meeting across the hall in room 208 at 7 o'clock tonight. You are all invited to come and learn about how we're trying to do this work on a global scale. Because truthfully, this is what the project that is working in Zimbabwe is trying to do, and the group of people who are working in Nepal, the people who are going next week to Israel and trying to get into the occupied territories, etc. And of course, the group of us who are heading for Copenhagen in December to convince the United Nations to put a mediation provision in the climate change treaty. So there's one last piece that I would like to say. Maybe Eileen has the last piece, and then we'd like to ask each of you to answer a question. And I'll give you the question in advance, so that you can think about it while I sort of give you this last piece. The question is, actually, well, you don't have the agenda, do you? No. So the question is, what is one useful thing that you have learned about forgiveness today that has really struck you, or one thing that you will do differently when you return to your practice after this session? Okay? So maybe, actually, why don't we start with that? Huh? Yeah, why don't you start?
Not that question. I was going to do wrap-up.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, so what I want to say sort of as wrap-up is this, that what we've been talking about in terms of bringing forward forgiveness and mediation to me is the advanced course of forgiveness. The focus of my work over the last 5 years has really been in doing the one-on-one work with people, which for me is the laboratory that I'm learning in, and for most people, I think we need to learn that first. Although there are many opportunities, and the more we do become familiar with the process, I think the more skillfully we can draw that out, especially those of us who aren't therapists. But in that vein, what I see that's different than what we've been talking about, so I just want to presence this, is that for many people, many times, the forgiveness is going to come later. And that when people are in conflict, that's where they are, they're in conflict. That's where they need to have their anger. They need to be projecting, they need to be blaming. I hope that over time that time gets and that need gets shorter and shorter, and that more and more people can really move to forgiveness more quickly. And it does happen, and as Louise said, we're very blessed when we get to be a part of that. But I do want to also just presence what's been true that I've witnessed is that it's many times years after the divorce that people go back and are ready to forgive, which just goes back to the point I made earlier, that that sense of timing is very individual and it needs to be honored and trusted. And the other thing is that I think in the purest form, forgiveness is a personal journey, and it's it's not a transaction. Although sometimes it looks like a transaction. If I apologize, will you forgive me? And there is that level and that exchange that can happen. But there's a whole other aspect of forgiveness, as I say, which I think is deeper and purer, which is we may never talk about it. The person that may be involved may have died many years ago, and I can still do all of the forgiveness work and need to. And so I think that it's important to just recognize that at its essence, it's really a personal journey, and there can be pieces of completion and closure and choices that we make about communicating with the other person involved. There may be things they can say that make it easier or harder for us, but none of that should take away from the essence of what it is that we're moving through ourselves. And with that,
A last word from my point of view. What I love about mediation is that it makes us, each of us, into better human beings. It allows us to practice what we know to be the virtues that we require in order to live whole and intelligent and caring lives. It constantly finds us coming up a little bit short and asks us to go just a little bit further. So it's a reminder that none of us are perfect. All of us have conflicts in our lives. Each of us is struggling with those conflicts. And each of us is learning some of the lessons that are most needed to learn in order to improve ourselves as human beings. So the final thing I'd like to leave you with is a quotation from Wendell Berry, who's a wonderful writer. It's in your materials. It seems to have disappeared. Let's see. Well, let me just read it to you. It's called To My Mother. I was your rebellious son. Do you remember? Sometimes I wonder if you do remember. So complete has your forgiveness been. So complete has your forgiveness been. I wonder sometimes if it did not precede my wrong, and I erred, safe found within your love, prepared ahead of me the way home, or my bed at night, so that almost I should forgive you, who perhaps foresaw the worst that I might do, and forgave before I could act, causing me to smile now looking back, to see how paltry was my worst, compared to your forgiveness of it already given. And this, then, is the vision of that heaven of which we have heard, where those who love each other have forgiven each other, where for that the leaves are green, the light a music in the air, and all is unentangled, and all is undismayed. Beautiful, huh? So I would like to thank Louise, who is no longer in our presence, and Nan. Huh? You have an announcement also. Okay, but first let's thank Nan and Louise for being on this panel, and
Louise has gone to get some handouts for you all, and so she just wants you to know that if you want her training materials on mediating relationally and transformatively, she's going to be back here in just a few minutes. On every table is a flyer about the 5th Rocky Mountain Retreat, and many of you have already been to this, but I want to just give you a little bit of background. This retreat was started so that each practitioner would have the ability to go to a place every 1 or 2 or 3 years to just remind themselves that you have to take care of yourself in order to do this kind of work that we do. This year we have Bernie Mayer, who just wrote another book, Staying with Conflict. Di, Kato, and Lily will be doing all the rituals at the retreat. Robin Amadei does our evening proposals, and Christy Coates, many of you know Christy Coates, is a music specialist. Emily Gould is chairing the section this year and is sponsoring this. I'm the conference facilitator. There's going to be a special address by Michael Alloy. Because of the recession, we've lowered the price $200 and we've shortened it to a weekend. So those of you who are on the East Coast can get to the mountains of Colorado by leaving at 7 in the morning on Friday, and you can get home on Sunday night for $3.95. All your food, retreat, CLEs. Last year we got 21 CLEs if you're a lawyer. This year we have Diane Hamilton, and many of you may know Diane for being a pioneer in the field of conflict resolution in the state of Utah, where there were no mediators, like 15 years ago, and now she's pushed through all this legislation, and they have one of the strongest programs in the West, all due to her. She started studying the work of Ken Wilber, and if any of you are not familiar with him, just Google Ken Wilber. He's a brain with 2 feet, and probably the Aristotle of our time, who is so ill because his brain is so big that she is now his lead trainer, and she's going all over the country and the world training in integral spirituality and the work of Ken Wilber, and not mediating anymore. So this is wonderful. She's thrilled about this because she gets to come back and present her new passion to the field that she was so involved in for a while. So Diane Musho Hamilton will be closing, and Bernie Mayer will be opening. So we'd love to have you join us, and you can go to the ACR site at the bottom here and sign up. I am the room mistress. So if you have special needs, come find me, and I'll put you in a room with your friend, or save a spot for your friend if you think you're coming with someone. And our singles are almost sold out. But and then again, my last pitch is for Mediators Beyond Borders. Please come hear his impassioned speech tonight at 7 o'clock in room 208, which is just right next door. And Louise has these materials that she's going to pass out to you right now.
I forgot we were supposed to do shameless promotion. I'm just going to pass these out. If for anyone who's interested in relational approaches and how it is to do more of this, we've got trainings in Baltimore. We can design them, of course, other places, but here are these sheets for you all. Thank you, and thank you all for this whole wonderful day.
So we're going to do this really quickly. Again, the question is a word or phrase that represents one thing that you learned that seems especially important to you, or one thing different that you're going to do when you get home as a result of our conversation here today. Oh, we've got, you're right.
That's okay,
not-
no, that's
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah, thanks. For me, it was the concept of gravity and using that paradigm to explain conflict was a brilliant way of framing something that people could relate to.
Permission.
Great. Actually, I can think of 2 things that really stand out. One is to start with a forgiveness of myself for my foibles, to get in there. And the second is to get a spray can of oxytocin.
Amen. Industrial strength.
I thought, Eileen, I thought your work on learning was very good.
Time has to be right. The time has to be right.
Always another layer of forgiveness.
I loved the concept of transcending conflict, and at that place when you had learned how and why the conflict took place and the lessons in it. I loved that.
I had a conservative Lutheran upbringing where I was taught that you must forgive, or you have to forgive, and that's been a sticking point for me in my journey. And today I just went, oh, there's a choice. Nice. It changes everything. It's really cool.
Using forgiveness in my closing comments.
Great. In the back.
I think I echo the time, that the time has to be right. That was, and that mediation handles steps 1 and 2 out of the 5, and then you have the freedom to go below the line. The mediation forms the critical mass that makes that all possible.
Lots, but starting a mediation session, asking if people regret anything they've done.
me, the initial word was challenge, and I think now I will think about self-forgiveness as the continuum of the challenge.
Going the other end, I like Louise's comment about, is there anything else you'd like to say? Although I have to confess, I don't really want to do that in the mediations where we haven't reached resolution, because I feel like it's just frequently, at some point we have to say, okay, we're going around, and maybe we should agree to disagree and go to another forum. So in the ones where things feel like they're going well, I'd like to ask that. I'm not sure I want to do that in the ones where we're just still beating each other up.
And hold on 1 second.
No, you're turning it on me.
Yeah.
For me, it was self as instrument, that we have to keep on doing our own work, and the other was timing. I was really sensitized to the need to be just more aware of timing around forgiveness.
Thank you.
I'm going to take forward the idea of continuing to open up a space and to give time and try to get the right questions in the right places, continue to try and do that for the participants to do their work.
I'd like to keep on keeping on, and with some new tools. Thank you.
I think timing is something I think that I might tend to rush the forgiveness part a little bit, being a type A person. So I think timing is really important, and I think there's Man's example of coming back 7 years later, and there's always time to address forgiveness if you need to.
I was impressed by the possibility of detachment or release. Sometimes detachment or release makes me reframing, possibility of reframing the conflict.
Looking at the perspective of the person with whom I have the conflict.
Great. Louise?
Oh, just how much opportunity there is all around us to be the instrument to take care of ourselves, to do the work that we're really asking others to do, also do it for ourselves.
I loved Tutu's comment on practical politics. Forgiveness is practical politics, and we're so political in our interpersonal relationships too. So I think that quote is just awesome.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
This has been a pleasure for us.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you forgive us. We'll see you tonight. Ah, yes, the evaluation sheets, please, if you would fill those out.